Like the portrait painter outmoded by the invention of the camera, or the broadsheet journalist gazumped by social media, I've been invited to reappraise my career in the wake of AI in music. I have virtual tinnitus from the alarm bells being sounded by people in the music-making fraternity. Wave goodbye to the last remnants of any plausible income, they cry. But perhaps to my own surprise, I find myself very relaxed about my projected career death. So why am I so underwhelmed by the existential threat of AI music? Well, I think my main reason would be that, to my knowledge, we've been making artificially intelligent music for years. In my youth, the musical revolution came from the turntable and its umbilically attached DJ. Sampling was a threat to all that we knew. The art of regurgitating old recordings and manipulating them with ever more engaging software. From this development, we soon saw the advent of technological advances designed to free the DJ from the irritation of dealing with the tricky, capricious and unreliable musician. And though it led to pioneering and innovating music making, eventually feeding back into the day-to-day language of the live musician, it also signalled a move towards music made in ever-decreasing circles. A new breed of producer sprung up around this time. They patrolled the hazy middle ground between a new breed of conservative record company tastemaker and the troublesome artists, and represented a mode of music production which devalued the musician even further than was already the case. DJs were not only playing tunes on the radio, they began to produce them and even front the tunes themselves. The inconvenience of having to find some musicians to play the music along the way was something that all concerned were looking to find a way round. For any musician trying to do business during this era, it meant a level of disrespect economically and personally that even the lowly musician was unused to. Eventually, these producers found themselves sitting at desks at record companies. Famously, Frank Zappa attributed a move towards truly conservative music making to these young baseball cap wearing A&R men. He lamented the demise of the old cigar smoking record company execs who would put out music they didn't understand on an entrepreneurial whim. These new hip and streetwise young guys made it their job to hunt down what the kids were listening to and then get all their artists to replicate this in every generic way possible. Artificial intelligence in human form. Music making software catered as much as it could to these new requirements, making it ever more possible to make music that sounded modern, familiar and in time, quantizing the placing by computer of notes on set musical divisions in order to make everything play perfectly in time, and auto-tune, kind of the same but for pitch, set finite boundaries in pursuit of the perfect record, while simultaneously making everything sound kind of the same. As a music maker, these tools were handy and pleasing in the short term, but in the long term, sonically, quite boring. Subtly so that the ear just accepted it as music. But to anyone with a slightly discerning ear, it signalled a fatiguing and dulling kind of new world order that felt limited and inhuman. What is AI music? My stab at a definition would be the reconstitution of existing musical elements to create new arrangements of something which sounds plausible and familiar, using known sonic tools to create emotional effects. But surely, in the main, that's what we've been doing all along, isn't it? And hasn't the last 20 or 30 years been almost solely an exercise in this, driven by commercial incentive? The musician has long been an inconvenience for the music industry, eyed with suspicion and avoided at all costs. They've been a regrettable necessity in terms of producing raw materials, and every technical development that has weakened their grip on the record-making process has been greeted as a blessing by the gatekeepers of commercial music. The trouble is, what makes them so particularly unpredictable to the masters of musical content is what makes them innovative. Every now and then they are lauded for it, normally when enough time has passed and there is as little financial implication as possible. Jazz is a good example. Oh, how the record industry loved re-releasing the classic jazz albums of the 20th century during the CD revolution of the 80s, and how warmly they saluted those pioneers of music. And in equal measure, how much they run screaming from the very same energy if it dares show its face in the modern age. In Julian Barnes's book The Noise of Time, we reach into Dmitri Shostakovich's head and feel his pain as he plays the system set out in front of him. In his case, it is the communist state under Stalin. We see how he is forced at times to disguise his music within the strict cultural rules of Stalin's ever-changing rules. We see how he goes from being a hero to an enemy of the state. And worst of all, we see him, whilst on a rare trip to the US, appearing on television to cite Igor Stravinsky as an enemy of the Russian people, a man he privately considers to be a true genius. Such was the metaphorical or otherwise gun to his head that Shostakovich had no choice but to betray his own true feelings. In short, we see a man forcing himself and his art into the confines of the box dictated to him by the system he finds himself living in. I believe that we suffer the same constraints on the Western capitalist side of that old divide, but in our case, we are controlled by commercial demands and constraints. In order to survive, we must create commerce for our music. And though there are definite and obvious moments of pioneering enterprise and explosive new art, there is also a hell of a lot of regurgitation and cyclical music making. To be commercially successful invariably requires some sort of familiarity to the consumer. The capitalist consumer largely doesn't trust a product that it isn't tried and tested, and so as artists, we are compelled to serve up the familiar and disguise the innovative. We live in a system riddled with the commerce of the familiar. With all this emphasis placed on things surrounding the same, inhuman, and in essence commercially cohesive, we've been consuming music of an ever safer nature and capable of being made by ever larger numbers of people. All fine and democratic on one hand, even perhaps punk in its ethic. But it is no surprise to me that AI music, which is now emerging, sounds remarkably like the music we've been making for many a year now. I'm certain that AI music will take a hold in some form. I don't see a great difference between what it can produce and what our radio stations are littered with today. It may finally signal the direct connection between the senior record executive and the consumer, thus creating the perfect commercial music model. Zero labour costs, zero workforce, zero hassle. Just music to please the masses, made by 3 rich executives and their computer programmers. However, there are still some of us who require a human story to validate what we listen to. I'm confident there will still be a place for those who are highly skilled in the operation of a musical instrument and who can express something human upon it, either pre-written or improvised. I'm confident that AI will simply do away with the illusion that has endured that much of what we hear is in some way related to music. It is, but only partially. I'm also confident that people will not care one jot how music is delivered to them, just as long as they can get from it what they need. And just like people will drink high-sugar fizzy drinks until their teeth drop out in order to keep feeling a feeling, so people will be perfectly happy with AI-created music. And I'm also confident that there will always be those of a more discerning nature who are looking for something more than that. And that is why the painter was not killed off by the photograph, the writer was not exterminated by social media, and musicians will not be rendered defunct by AI. That old tried and tested form of art originality is surely the counter-revolution to this rather dull AI revolution. There is now a very wide data-driven sludge of non-original music that AI can make. Sure, AI is making original music that we have not heard before, but it is all derivative. It is a challenge to us as humans. We are asking ourselves how original we really are. I would suggest we've been extremely lazy and unoriginal in recent years. I would argue that we will look back at this postmodern age of regurgitation and regard ourselves as somewhat tail-chasing beings. The focus is on us now to prove that we are not just zeros and ones like the machines we've created, to prove that we are creators of our own destiny. If we fail, then perhaps it is a moment to realise how very unspecial we really are. But I have faith. I have faith that we will rise to this challenge and rise above the generic and up towards an enlightened place. This is a moment for the innovative to shine again. I don't know what form it will take, but I'm excited by what human beings will do to adapt to this new challenge. One interesting byproduct would undoubtedly be to see what the human race does with AI to innovate and inspire. Humans will once again use technology to create. To my mind, we have 2 choices. Surrender to the idea that we are generic, repetitive, programmable beings whose art can be reverse engineered, or believe in our ability to adapt and innovate. I, for one, would prefer a world driven by the latter, even if just by aspiring to it, we get to experience an exhilarating ride.